I came home early. She was on the phone with her sister. She didn't know I was there. And in 60 seconds, I heard 11 years of marriage described as something she had already decided to leave 7 months ago. I never said a word. I just stood there in my own kitchen and listened. And what I did next is the reason I'm telling you this story. If you are new here, pull up a chair, because you are about to hear something that is going to stay with you. And if you have been riding with us, you already know the rules. The Karma Diaries never lies. I need you to do 3 things right now. Hit that like button. Share this video with somebody who needs to hear a story about what happens when a good man finally stops being invisible. And subscribe, because we're not slowing down. Now get comfortable. This one is going to take something out of you. My name is Broderick Elias. I am 47 years old, and I have been the band director at Walnut Hills High School in Cincinnati, Ohio, for 18 years. I drive a burgundy Chevy Tahoe with a dent in the rear passenger door that I keep meaning to get fixed, and I have a habit of humming, without realizing it, low and under my breath, the way musicians do when their mind is working on something the mouth has not figured out how to say yet. I live in a brick Tudor on Berkshire Place in the Clifton neighborhood, the kind of house with crown molding and a clawfoot tub, and a front porch that should have been full of people, but mostly just collected leaves. I have been married to Celeste Elias for 11 years. She is a corporate event planner who works out of a downtown Cincinnati firm and spends most of her days making other people's occasions look effortless. She has a gift for it, genuinely. She can read a room in under a minute, adjust the temperature of any conversation she walks into, and make everyone she speaks to feel like the most important person there. At home, that same gift ran in a different direction. She used it to manage me. Not cruelly, not obviously, but in a way that someone who is very good at organizing spaces begins to organize the people in them without quite asking permission. I want to tell you something about who I am before the story starts, because the story only makes sense if you understand the kind of man I was walking into it. I am not a fighter. I am not dramatic. I do not raise my voice, and I do not make scenes. What I do is listen. I have spent my career teaching 16-year-olds how to find a note that lives inside them and get out into the open air. And that work requires a particular kind of patience, the kind that waits without pressing. The downside of being that kind of man is that sometimes you wait so long for a thing to resolve itself that you stop noticing it is still there, sitting in the corner of your life, getting bigger every year. The divorce papers were in a manila folder in my desk at school. Not at home, because there was no version of that folder existing in our house on Berkshire Place, without Celeste finding it and reframing it before I had decided what it meant. I had requested them 3 weeks earlier through a family law attorney named Paulette Jordan, whose office was on Reading Road in Norwood. I had not told anyone, not my brother Wendell, not my closest friend Gerald, not a single colleague at the school. I had carried it the way I carry most things, quietly, in the space between what I said out loud and what I actually thought. The folder sat in that desk drawer for 22 days. Every morning I would come in before first period, make coffee in the faculty lounge, walk back to my office and sit with it, not opening it, just sitting with the fact of it. The reason I had not signed was not cold feet or sentiment or any kind of hope that things between Celeste and me were going to improve on their own. The reason I had not signed was that something in me felt like I was still missing one important piece of information, and I could not name what it was. I had learned to trust that feeling. It had saved me from bad decisions before. So I waited. 11 years. That is how long I had been married to a woman who had, at some point I could not pinpoint exactly, stopped treating our marriage as something she was in and started treating it as something she was managing toward an exit. I did not know that yet when I was sitting with that folder. What I knew was the texture of the last 2 years, the way Celeste started taking calls in the laundry room, the way she talked about future plans without including me in the architecture of them, the way she would ask me questions at dinner that sounded like conversation, but were actually inventory, checking what I knew, what I had noticed, what I might say to whom. The distance between us had not arrived all at once. That is what made it so difficult to see while it was happening. It came the way a tide goes out steadily, without announcement, leaving you standing on sand that used to be underwater, wondering at what point the sea departed. She stopped touching me first. Not dramatically, not with a declaration. She just stopped initiating, and I was not the kind of man who pushed. So I withdrew too, and then we were two people sleeping in the same bed who had both silently agreed not to reach across the center. 2 years of that. You stop noticing it the way you stop noticing the hum of the refrigerator. It is just the sound of the house now. I had thrown myself into work the way men in bad marriages often do. Not as an escape exactly, more as a place where I still made sense. My kids at Walnut Hills were doing well that semester. The jazz ensemble had placed second at regionals, and I had 3 seniors with real college scholarship prospects in brass. Those things mattered to me in a way that felt genuine rather than compensatory. But I knew, driving home through Hyde Park at 6:15 on a Tuesday evening, that I had made myself very comfortable being needed in every room except the one that should have mattered most. That was my part in the collapse. I knew it. I had just not said it to anyone yet. The morning everything shifted was an ordinary Saturday in late October. Cincinnati in October is a specific kind of beautiful, all copper and rust along Observatory Avenue. The kind of light that makes even the ordinary streets look like somebody painted them on purpose. Celeste had been up early, which was not unusual. She kept a planner that she treated like a second brain, color-coded, scheduled in 15-minute blocks, and Saturday mornings were often when she prepped the following week. I came downstairs at 8:15, poured coffee, and found a note on the counter that said she had gone to brunch with her sister Patrice and would be back by 2. She left her phone on the kitchen counter. That was unusual. Celeste did not go anywhere without her phone. She treated it the way surgeons treat their hands, carefully, with attention, never casually setting it down in a place where it might be picked up or noticed by the wrong person. I saw it sitting there next to the fruit bowl, and I understood immediately that she had forgotten in a hurry, which meant whatever was happening at brunch with Patrice was something she had wanted to arrive at fast. I picked up my own coffee and sat at the kitchen table and thought about that for several minutes. Then I got up, put on my coat, and drove to the over-the-Rhine neighborhood without calling ahead. I knew which restaurant it would be. Celeste and Patrice had been going to the same corner spot on Vine Street every time they needed to talk about something serious, since before I met either of them. It was a place with exposed brick and the kind of pressed tin ceiling that Cincinnati does better than most cities, a neighborhood staple that had outlasted 3 rounds of gentrification without changing its menu. I parked on a side street off Liberty and walked. I was not planning to walk in. I just wanted to know she was where she said she was. That tells you something about where we were by that October. I stood outside the window for long enough to confirm that Celeste and Patrice were there, and then I saw that there was a third person at the table, a woman I recognized as Celeste's friend Noelle, who worked in real estate and who I had always vaguely understood did not like me, though she had never been unkind enough to say so directly. The 3 of them were deep in something. Celeste had her hands flat on the table the way she does when she is making a point she wants to land. Patrice was nodding in a way that looked less like agreement and more like encouragement, and Noelle was writing something in a leather notebook. I stood on the sidewalk in the October cold and felt the bottom of something fall out. I did not go inside. I walked around the block once, which is what I do when I need to think, and then I found a coffee shop 2 doors down and took a table near the front window and sat. I ordered a black coffee I did not need, and I sat with what I had just seen. Noelle was a real estate agent. Her writing in that notebook, in that meeting, at a table where my wife's sister was nodding with that kind of focus, had a particular shape to it that I recognized even from a sidewalk in October. They were looking at property, and the property they were looking at was not for a client. I had been in education long enough to know when I was looking at a plan that had already been in progress for a while. I drove home and put Celeste's phone back on the counter, exactly where she had left it. I sat in the living room and I hummed, low and under my breath. Nothing in particular, just sound filling space while I organized what I knew. She had told me about brunch with her sister. She had not told me Noelle was going to be there. She had forgotten her phone in a hurry. Noelle had been writing in a notebook that looked like a showing record. These were facts. What they added up to, I was not going to let myself decide yet, because I had seen too many of my students reach the wrong conclusion too fast and sing the wrong note with complete confidence. Confidence is not accuracy. I reminded myself of that and waited. Celeste got home at 2:15. She came through the door the way she always did on days when she had been performing, a little relieved to be done, a little wound up still, the social energy not quite dissipated. She picked up her phone from the counter, without commenting on having left it, which told me she had remembered halfway to the restaurant and made a deliberate choice not to come back for it. She kissed me on the cheek and asked if I wanted to do something for dinner, maybe the Thai place on Ludlow Avenue. I said sure. She went upstairs to change, and I sat in the kitchen and thought about what a person looks like when they are still running a plan, and also still trying to look like everything is fine. She looked exactly like that. The weeks after that Saturday had a particular quality. I was watching more carefully than I ever had, which was saying something for a man who spent his career reading rooms. And what I saw was a woman who was closing a chapter she had not yet officially told me she was closing. She started going through closets on weekends, not visibly clearing them, but organizing them in a way that looked like someone deciding what was worth keeping. She took 2 phone calls I was not meant to hear, stepping into the backyard both times despite it being November in Ohio, which meant the conversation mattered more to her than the cold did. She started asking me, with what seemed like genuine curiosity, about my pension and how the school's benefits transfer at retirement. I want to be careful here not to make this sound like she was a villain. That is too easy and too false. Celeste was a woman who had made a decision she was too afraid to say out loud, and that fear made her manage the situation in the way she knew how, which was quietly and in advance, and with a plan already drawn before the conversation was had. That is not evil. It is cowardly, yes, but it is also the behavior of someone who knows that the conversation is going to be painful and keeps finding reasons to push it one more week, one more month, until the plan is solid enough that the conversation feels inevitable rather than optional. I recognize that because I have been doing something similar with the manila folder in my desk drawer. The Friday that broke everything open, I left school earlier than usual. The jazz ensemble rehearsal had been canceled because 3 of my section leads had a college fair to attend, and I was home by 4:30 instead of my usual 6. I let myself in through the side door off the kitchen. Celeste's car was in the driveway, which meant she was home early too, which was less usual. I could hear her before I could see her. She was in the dining room, which we never used for actual dining, which we had turned into a second office space for her planning work. And she was on the phone. Her voice had that focused, unhurried quality it got when she was talking to someone she trusted completely. I should have made noise. I should have called out her name, rattled my keys, done any of the reasonable things a man does when he comes home and does not want to startle his wife. Instead, I stood in the kitchen and listened, the same way I used to stand in the back of the auditorium during rehearsals, perfectly still, letting the sound come to me rather than going toward it. And what came to me changed the architecture of everything I thought I understood about the last 3 years. She was talking to Patrice. The way she talked to Patrice was different from how she talked to anyone else. Looser, more honest. The performance turned down to something close to zero. What I heard, standing in my own kitchen in the November dark, while my wife sat in the next room, was not what I had been bracing myself to hear. It was not another man. It was not financial betrayal or a secret apartment or any of the specific shapes I had mentally prepared for. It turned out to be both simpler and harder than any of those things. I know Patrice, she said. I know he deserves a real conversation. I know that, but every time I think about sitting across from Broderick and actually saying it, I cannot do it. You know how he gets quiet? What silence does he do? That is the thing I cannot face. It is not anger. I could handle anger. It is quiet. He goes so quiet, and you can see him reorganizing everything inside, and I am not strong enough to watch that. There was a pause. I know I have been saying I will tell him for 7 months. I know how that sounds. I am not proud of it. 7 months. She had been sitting on this for 7 months. I stood in the kitchen, and I did not move, and I did not make a sound, and I hummed, so quietly that even I could barely hear it, just a single low note that had no song attached to it, just breath with shape, just the body doing the only thing it could think of while the mind dealt with what it had just received. She had not been planning to stay. She had been planning to go. For 7 months she had known it, and I had not, and she had sat across from me at the Thai place on Ludlow Avenue, and asked me how my students were doing, and passed me the green curry. And she had known. The Noel situation is almost ready, she said. 2 more weeks, maybe 3. Once the lease is signed, I will have something concrete to tell him. Something that feels settled rather than just me saying I want to leave and not knowing what leaving looks like. I cannot tell him I want to leave until I know what leaving looks like. That is just how I am built. Another pause. I could hear Patrice saying something on the other end, something low and careful. Then Celeste. I am not doing it to hurt him. That is what I need you to understand. Broderick is a good man. He has been a good man this whole time. I just stopped being in love with him somewhere along the way, and I never found the right time to say it. I stood with that sentence the way you stand with a chord that is just resolved in a direction you did not expect. Not discordant. Just different from what you were prepared for. She had not stopped loving me because of something I had done. She had stopped loving me the way that sometimes happens in long marriages when two people grow in directions that do not keep meeting. And she had carried that knowledge for 7 months without letting me be part of it, without giving me the dignity of knowing what was actually happening in our own house. That was the part that cost something. Not that it was over, that she had let me keep not knowing. Hold on. Uncle Sammy needs to pause right here, because I want you to sit with what just happened. Broderick did not hear that his wife was cheating. He did not hear she was stealing from him or running some scheme. He heard that she stopped loving him and could not find the nerve to say so, and that she had been living inside that silence for 7 months while he sat across from her at dinner tables and drove her to work events and kept showing up to a marriage that was already over in her mind. And the question I want you to ask yourself right now is this: which kind of betrayal is actually harder to come back from? Keep watching, because Broderick is about to do something that most people never find strength to do. I went back out the side door. Quietly, I got in the Tahoe, and I drove to Alt Park, which is a Cincinnati park with pavilion at the top of a hill that looks out over the Ohio River Valley, and I sat in the parking lot for over an hour. I did not cry. I am not built for that in the easy way some people are, the way water comes out of a tap when you need it. What I did was sit with the noise inside my head and let it run through whatever it needed to run through. Some of it was grief. Some of it was a specific shame of realizing that the instinct I had been following for 22 days, the one that kept me from signing that folder, had been correct all along. I had been missing one piece of information. Now I have it. When I got home, Celeste was making dinner. She moved around the kitchen the way she always did in the evenings, competent and calm, a podcast playing low from her phone on the counter. She said I was home earlier than usual, and I said rehearsal got canceled, and she said she was making pasta. And did that sound good? I said yes. I set the table. She poured water. We had dinner together on a November Friday like two people who shared a life, and neither of us said what was actually true. The difference was that now we were both keeping the same secret, and she did not know that yet, and I needed to sit with that for a little while before I decided what to do with it. I did not go back to the school on Monday and sign the folder. That surprised me, honestly. I had expected that what I heard would make the decision feel simpler, more obvious, and instead it made me want to be more careful rather than less. Because I had heard something real from my wife, something she had said to her sister in a moment of genuine honesty, and what I had heard was more complicated than betrayal. She was not cruel. She was not scheming. She was afraid of my silence, which was a real thing about me, and she had let that fear keep her from doing the right thing for 7 months. Which was a real thing about her. Both of those things could be true, and I could still be the one who brought the conversation to the table. I thought about my mother, who raised Wendell and me in a house on Freeman Avenue in the West End with a clarity about hard conversations that I had always admired. She used to say that the most important thing you could do for someone you cared about was to make sure they had the chance to be honest, even when they were failing at honesty on their own. I had spent my marriage giving Celeste room to manage everything without confronting any of it directly, and I had called that patience. What it actually was, I understood sitting in that park in November, was avoidance dressed up in a better coat. I had contributed to this silence as much as she had. I just had to be the one to end it. On the following Wednesday evening, I came home from school and made dinner. That was unusual enough that Celeste noticed it. I was not a man who cooked on weeknights. Not because I could not, but because we had divided things the way couples divide things without discussing it, and cooking had ended up on her side. I made red beans and rice, which was something my mother used to make on Wednesdays, and I set the table properly, with actual plates and glasses rather than a half effort we had both been putting in for months. When Celeste came down and saw it, she stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at me with an expression I had not seen from her in a long time. It was the expression of someone who was not sure which version of a conversation they were walking into. We sat down. We ate. I asked her how her week was going, and she told me about a corporate event she was managing for a pharmaceutical company in Blue Ash, a gala dinner that had 17 moving parts, and a client who kept changing the centerpiece order. I listened. I asked follow-up questions. And then, when she had finished and was pouring herself more water, I said, "Celeste, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." She set down the water pitcher very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands want to shake, but you are not going to let them. I told her what I had heard. Not everything, not every word, but the shape of it. That I had come home early on a Friday. That I had heard her on the phone with Patrice. That I knew she had been sitting with a decision for 7 months that belonged to both of us. I kept my voice level. I did not raise it, not even slightly, which I could feel made her more frightened rather than less, because she had said as much to Patrice. That was my quietness she could not face. But I was not going to perform anger. I did not feel in order to make the conversation easier for her. This was going to be what it actually was. She started to speak twice and stopped both times. The third time she got through it. She said she was sorry. She said she had been trying to find the right moment for her so long that the right moment had become a myth she kept chasing. She said she did not stop loving me overnight, and she could not point to the week or the month it changed, only that at some point she had noticed she was not reaching for me anymore and had assumed, quietly and without testing it, that the feeling was permanent. I asked her if she had told me any of this. She said no. I asked her why. She said, "Because you go quiet, and in that quiet, I always hear you deciding I am not enough trouble to fight for." That hit me somewhere specific. I sat with it before I responded, because she was not entirely wrong. My quiet was not indifference, but I had never explained that to her, and silence has the same shape, whether it comes from processing or from not caring, and I had never thought to show her the difference. I had waited for things to resolve the way I waited for a student to find the right note, giving them room, not pressing, and she had read that patience as detachment. We had both misread the score for years and kept playing what we thought the other person had written. I told her what I had decided, which I had been working out since that evening in Alt Park. I told her I was not going to fight for a marriage that one of us had already left. That was not the kind of man I was, and it was not the kind of love I believed in. What I was going to do instead was make sure we ended things the way two people who had spent 11 years together deserved to end them, with honesty, with care for each other's dignity, and without the kind of drawn-out legal ugliness that turned everything that had been real into ammunition. She looked at me across that table, and I saw something happen in her face that I could not fully name. Relief and grief arrived at the same time. The weeks that followed were not easy, but they were honest in a way our marriage had not been in years. We talked about the house, about the financial picture, about what Celeste needed to get settled, and what I needed to feel like I was not starting from nothing. My brother Wendell drove down from Columbus and sat with me in the living room on a Sunday afternoon and let me talk for 3 hours without trying to fix anything, which was the right thing, and I told him so. Gerald came by on a Tuesday night, and we played cards at the kitchen table until midnight, and he did not ask me anything he did not already know I was ready to answer. I found out who my people were in those weeks. That part was not nothing. Celeste moved to the apartment in Over the Rhine that Noel had helped her find. It was a 1-bedroom on the 4th floor of a building on Elm Street. The kind of building with high ceilings and original hardwood, and the sound of the neighborhood coming through the windows on warm nights. I helped her move 2 carloads of boxes because she did not have a truck, and it seemed like the right thing to do. She cried in the stairwell on the second trip. Not dramatically, just quietly, the way someone cries when decision becomes real in a way that planning it could not make real. I did not say anything. I just let her finish, and then we carried the next box up. I went back to the house on Berkshire Place, and I stood in the kitchen and the living room and the dining room that we had never used for dining, and I took inventory, not of what she had taken, but of what remained. The crown molding, the clawfoot tub, the porch that collected leaves, the kitchen table where we had finally told each other the truth. The house felt different without her in it. Not empty exactly, more like a room after a concert, when the sound is gone but something of it is still in the air. I put a record on, something from Miles Davis, and I sat on the front porch in November cold, and I hummed along with something I could barely hear. I went back to school on a Monday, and I took the manila folder out of my desk, and I looked at it for a long time. Then I signed the papers and mailed them to Paulette Jordan's office on Reading Road. It took less than a minute. All the weight I had been carrying in that drawer, and it took less than a minute to put it in motion. I sat at my desk afterward, and I graded student evaluations for the jazz ensemble performance, and I drank bad coffee from the faculty lounge, and I let the day be an ordinary day, which is not a small thing. An ordinary day on the other side of an honest conversation is worth more than months of careful, managed quiet. My students noticed something different about me that following semester, though not one of them could have named what it was. The assistant director, a young woman named Priya, who had been teaching woodwinds for 3 years and had a sharp ear for everything, told me in March that the ensemble had a different quality in rehearsals since winter break. She said they sounded more present, more willing to take risks, less like they were performing, and more like they were actually playing. I thought about that for a long time. I think what happened was that I stopped performing in my own life, and it came through in the room. These things have a way of traveling, without you meaning to carry them. I am not going to tell you I came out of that ear hole. I am also not going to tell you it broke me, because that is not what happened either. What happened was something quieter and more gradual than either of those things. I learned that being easy to live with is not the same as being present. That patience given without communication is not a gift. That a man who waits for things to resolve on their own is also choosing silence. And silence has consequences whether you intend them or not. I had spent 18 years teaching young people to put sound into the air instead of holding it in. It took a marriage and an understand I had never applied that lesson to the part of my life that mattered most. The last time I spoke to Celeste was on a Tuesday afternoon in April. She called to tell me the divorce had been finalized, which I already knew, but she called anyway. The conversation was short. She asked how the students were doing. I told her about the senior who had been offered a scholarship to Oberlin for brass performance, which I was genuinely happy about. She said that was wonderful. There was a pause that was not uncomfortable, just honest, the kind of pause that happens between two people who have said what needed to be said and have nothing left to manage. She said she hoped I was doing well. I told her I was. I told her I hoped the same for her. That was true. It cost me something, and it was still true. And that is the story of Broderick Elias, a man who stood in his own kitchen in November and heard the truth his wife could not bring herself to say, and who chose to bring that truth to the table himself instead of waiting for it to destroy him slowly. No courtroom explosion, no public humiliation, no revenge that needed to be filmed, just a quiet man who finally refused to be invisible and gave his marriage the ending it deserved. That is what real karma looks like sometimes. Not a crash, a clearing. Uncle Sammy always tells you the truth, and the truth is, the stories that stay with you are the ones where somebody chooses dignity when they had every right to choose destruction. If this one moved you, do your part, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the Karma Diaries by Uncle Sammy. The bell notification is on for a reason. Turn it on and come back. We are not going anywhere, and neither is the truth. The end.